In 1997, 60 Minutes profiled a rural county in Florida whose sheriff was particularly adept at procuring this equipment. He proudly showed reporter Leslie Stahl the small Air Force that he had compiled through the Pentagon program, which included 23 military helicopters, 2 C-12 luxury aircraft, a motorhome, several trucks and trailers, and a bomb robot. So with all this equipment, then local police departments, they started forming SWAT teams. And then, of course, after September 11th, we get DHS, and DHS starts handing out these Homeland Security grants to police departments across the country, which then again are purchasing more SWAT equipment. In this case, a very popular grant is to purchase a Bearcat, which is a sort of armored personnel carrier. It doesn't come from the Pentagon, it's sort of designed for more domestic use, but I still think there's something sort of disturbing about it, and it's always sold on the idea that this is to prevent terrorist attacks. But it's going to places like Eau Claire, Wisconsin, Canyon County, Idaho, and the idea that, I guess those places may be in desperate need of armored personnel carriers to thwart terrorists, armed with weapons of mass destruction. But you would think that there would be more useful ways to put that money into use. Terrorism, school shootings, these are usually the reason why these towns start SWAT teams, but then once they're in place, they're almost always used primarily to serve drug warrants. And the vast majority of those are marijuana warrants. So once they have the SWAT teams in place, then we get another group of incentive problems, and that is that they're expensive to maintain, and they're expensive to keep up the training of the officers on the SWAT team. And so you then have the funding problem, and where the money comes from to keep the SWAT teams up, to get new equipment, to keep the officers trained, comes from a couple places. It comes from federal drug grants. Basically, they were phased out in the last administration. They're actually being brought back now, but burn grants are one very popular program. And basically, these are federal grants that are tied directly to drug arrest statistics. So you arrest more people, you confiscate more drugs, you get more money from the federal government. Well, what incentive does that give you? Well, you need this money to maintain the SWAT team, so it makes sense to deploy the SWAT team to serve drug warrants, because that's how you're going to get more money from the federal government. There's also the asset forfeiture laws, which are particularly easy to enforce on drug crimes if you can make any sort of connection whatsoever between the drugs that you find and the property, cash, cars, the house that the drugs were in. It becomes basically the onus to prove that the property didn't come from drug crimes tends to then fall on the suspect. There are lots of cases where someone was never even charged with the crime, but they lost on the property. There are these, if you go back through, do some legal searches on asset forfeiture cases, the whole premise of asset forfeiture is that property can be guilty of a crime regardless of sort of who was in control of the property at that time. So you'll see these absurd cases like United States government versus $55,343 in cash, or U.S. government versus 1968 Corvette. And it really becomes very, very difficult for the people who own this property. They then have to sort of prove that they own it legitimately, and you have to come up with receipts. And in a lot of cases, if it's less than $15,000 or $20,000, the amount of money in legal fees you're going to pay to get the property back could exceed the amount that was actually seized. So asset forfeiture laws, I think, also factor into this in a lot of ways, and there are lots of other problems, but I'll stick to the subject tonight. So give you one example, the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, right? In 1987, the Minneapolis SWAT team was sent on 35 no-knock raids, right? Doesn't seem an outlandish number for a city the size of Minneapolis. 10 years later, 1997, the city had 3 SWAT teams, and they were deployed 700 times. So in 10 years, the city goes from 35 no-knock warrants to 700. I doubt that the city of Minneapolis saw a 2,000% increase in violent crime. Again, these are the incentive problems and increasingly using the SWAT team for nonviolent crimes. We're seeing, even beyond drug crimes now, SWAT teams are being used to break up poker games. The magazine I work for, we have a video journalism site, Reason TV. We did a story last year about a Texas SWAT team that was sent in to break up a Texas Hold'em game at the local American Legion Hall. In 2006, in Fairfax, Virginia, a 38-year-old optometrist named Sal Colosi was at a local sports bar. was wagering on college football games with some friends, like they did most weeks. They got together, and they were fairly high wagers. It was $1,000, $1,500 a game, but they were all sort of professionals, very successful. He was a doctor; they could afford what they were doing, but they couldn't. I'm not sure why it's anyone's business. But one particular day, an undercover detective from the Fairfax Police Department happened to be there, overheard them discussing that they were wagering on these games. The detective befriended Colosi, and over the next year, basically started wagering with him, and sort of talked Colosi up in the wagers to the point where he tripped the local statute. There's a Virginia gambling statute that says if you bet more than this amount of money, you're automatically running a gambling operation, even if it's just you and another person. Once he tripped the state statute, they sent the SWAT team. And this guy had no prior criminal record. There's no reason to think he was a violent person. On the search warrant, basically they said gamblers are known to be violent people, therefore that's why they need the SWAT team. Colosi came out to meet this guy. He thought he was his friend, to pay back I think he was actually collecting a bet. And the SWAT team sort of descended, and we really don't know what happened next, how it happened. But one of the officer's guns discharged, scored a direct hit, shot Colosi in the chest. The bullet went right through his heart and killed him. The police say that the officer was getting out of the van and the door recoiled and hit his elbow, which caused the gun to fire and score a direct hit. I find that sort of implausible. Colosi's family thinks what happened is that Colosi was on a cell phone when the SWAT team came, and that the officer mistook the cell phone for a gun, which sounds a lot more plausible to me. The officer was given 2 weeks of, I believe it was paid leave for the incident, and the family, basically the family's trying to file a lawsuit, and to their credit, they really don't want money. What they want are changes in procedures to make sure this doesn't happen again. And unfortunately, I think they're down to their last complaint. I think most of their complaints now have been thrown out of court. And the complaints against the city have been completely dismissed. Their complaints about the procedure and the fact that Fairfax County admitted that SWAT teams served all of their search warrants, no matter what the crime was. They later tried to walk that back, but their complaints against the city were all thrown out, and all they have left is a complaint against the individual officer, which probably isn't going to get any changes in procedure.